I'm hoping that you've all come today with the expectation of finding out more about our networks and hearing from some of our fantastic ambassadors, who you hopefully will hear lots of incredible stories from later on. With that in mind, I'm going to go through a bit of an agenda for the session today. I'm going to introduce you to a few people, and then later on, you're going to have that opportunity to use the Q&A function to ask some of those pressing questions you might have, as well as hearing some fantastic stories from ambassadors from across different cohorts and different subjects as well. So in terms of who I am, my name is Rob, and I'm one of the early talent managers here at Teach First. There's a strong chance you've either spoken to one of my colleagues in the early talent team, or potentially even myself. We are there to support you through your onboarding journey as you join the program and get ready to make that huge difference in the classroom from September. Now, what I will say as well is at this time of year, it's a really exciting time of year because you're obviously coming to a point where if you're still at university, you're potentially finishing your exams, finishing coursework, and getting ready to really start thinking about Summer Institute and making that difference. If you're a career changer, then hopefully you're starting to get excited about the prospect of stepping into the classroom and really doing a career that hopefully you'll be incredibly proud of for a long, long time. So as I said, my name is Rob, and I'm also joined today by Tim, who's going to introduce himself in a little minute. And he's our head of, I'll let him introduce himself actually, because his title's very recently changed. And he's going to tell you a bit more about our networks and how they might be able to support you, how you might be able to get involved and things like that. And then we do also have some ambassadors that have joined us today. I'm not going to introduce those ambassadors yet. I'm going to wait till we get to that section. So in terms of the session today, the introduction, which has been done by myself. Got one more thing to talk about before I hand over to Tim, who's going to give you that overview, and then that ambassador Q&A is going to take up the most of the session to give you plenty of time to ask some of those questions you want to ask. So please do use this opportunity to ask any of those questions. Before we move into Tim's introduction, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. We do also have some other events coming up as well. And if you wanted to, and if you haven't already signed up these other events, please do think about doing so. The idea of these is to really get you excited about Summer Institute, as I say, and excited about the program in September. They will look at those particular issues that they mention in their titles. And the idea is to give you that opportunity to, if you're feeling potentially slightly concerned about any of those areas, it's an opportunity to come along and find out more about it and know why actually it'll be absolutely fine. And you're going to be given all of the skills that you need to be incredibly successful in the first 2 years of teaching. And last thing for me to say before I hand over to Tim is that it's only 7 weeks until full-time Summer Institute and 5 weeks until part-time Summer Institute as well. So it really is now the time to get excited about your next steps. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Tim, and I'm going to stop sharing my slides very quickly. I'll hand over to you, Tim, to introduce yourself and talk a bit more about networks.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. My name's Tim Mobbs. I'm a 2012 ambassador of the Teach First training programme. I trained in primary in Yorkshire and Humber, and I'm now head of community at Teach First. So I oversee all of our work with our wonderful ambassador community and the thriving networks that we work with, all of which will come to light over the next few minutes as I deliver some of the information. But I think I'd like to start by just saying, like, congratulations. Like, I think you've made an incredible choice by choosing Teach First as a route to train into teaching. It's the best decision I have ever made in my professional life. And it is a charity that has shaped my entire professional life. I came to Teach First from university after not knowing what I want to do when I grow up. Became a teaching assistant in the secondary school that I was taught in, and then knew that I'd fallen in love with working with young people and the impact that you can make and the privilege that that is. And Teach First was the route that allowed me to do that. It was a salaried route. It brought me through and gave me exceptional world-class training to become the best teacher I could possibly be, and then a school leader. And as I say, it's the best decision I've ever made. And I'm quite jealous that you're actually at the start of your journey and have all of that wonderful stuff to come. The networks and the ambassador community. One of the most unique things about Teach First is the phenomenal community that you've already joined by choosing Teach First as your training route, as your charity, as your lifelong mission to support children in the schools that need it most. Over the last 20 years, Teach First have trained over 18,000 teachers who've gone into classrooms and then stayed in schools, gone on to do amazing things outside of schools, started social enterprises, become NPs, become CEOs of charities, a whole plethora of amazing impact within the sector. And the way that we do that as an ambassador community is we connect. And the way we connect is to put ourselves out there. Networking conjures up all sorts of images for people. For me, when I first heard of networking, it was about standing in a room awkwardly with maybe some warm drink or wine and some stale nibbles and trying to make awkward conversation with strangers. And that happens. But what we're talking about networking is investing in yourself and your connections, because all of the data we have shows that people who feel more connected thrive better in schools. They have higher well-being, they feel more prepared to lead in schools, and overall they're more satisfied with their experience through the training program. But that's hard, right? And it takes effort and it's not easy. So there's a few tips that I'm going to give you over the next few minutes in how you can do that, certainly through Summer Institute, through the first few years in teaching. And then I'm actually going to leave it for the panel to talk about how networking has been effective for them. Clive, who's going to speak to you, has founded networks. He's a very connected man and used those connections to get into some very interesting spaces, but I'll leave Clive to say that. Same with Zara and same with Steph. Part of and leading various networks across the country. I'm going to share my screen and just share some stats and some things that I'm really proud of over the past few years of the work that my team's done. So people who join Teach First networks, we survey on a yearly basis. As you go through your Teach First experience, you'll start to understand how much we love a survey. But the great thing about a Teach First survey is we actually listen and we use the feedback that comes through those surveys to make adjustments. So last year we surveyed the member of our network and 75% agreed that children in disadvantaged communities have benefited from those individuals being part of the networks. That's through them progressing professionally. It's through them finding really interesting connections with people they can bring into the school and kind of impact that community. It's from sharing best practice. 79% agree that being a network means that it will be more likely that they remain in teaching long term. So having that peer group, nearly 8 out of 10 people say is essential for staying in teaching longer term. And being in these networks, 66% say they feel connected to the Teach First community. That number's slightly lower because a lot of our networks that we work with, we kind of work with at the moment behind the scenes and don't promote them as Teach First networks, and we put them out into the community with community leaders. However, that is shifting slightly, and as you come through the programme, what you will have the benefit of is Teach First led networks, which will be all about you progressing professionally beyond the end of the programme. Moving on to the next slide, I just want to give a sample of some of the amazing networks that we work with and some of the impact over the last few years. And I like to share this screen, not for you to kind of read in detail, you can access this at another time, but it just gives a flavour of how much happens outside of the classroom. And to share my experience, when I started teaching, I came to Teach First thinking, right, I am going to be the best teacher I can possibly be. I'm going to invest every possible second into teaching, and that's what I'm going to do. By doing that, I stayed in my classroom all day long. I didn't even go to the school staff room, so I didn't even start to build connections within my own school. And as such, it quite quickly became really isolating. Little did I know that when I was given the advice of that planning can wait, go and have lunch, meet your colleagues, started to do that, my well-being started to improve. I started to feel as part of a team and part of the school. But then like the next piece of advice was, now you're starting to build your own network within the school, look up and outwards and see what's beyond those gates. And there's some amazing things, and the amount of professional development you can get by putting the effort into connecting with people, reading some blogs, talking to people online, going to research events, going to network events is untold. And you'll build that through your career. So this slide just shows a few things that we've supported behind the scenes. And the bits that I love is groups of people coming together. And it's groups of people coming together to connect. Think really hard about how to solve a problem within education. Think really hard or talk about a political issue or something that's going on within education that our amazing ambassadors believe that they can solve. But this is where I'd recommend you start. So the QR code on the screen that you can scan now, I'll leave it up for the next few seconds. But what we're really working hard on as one of the key pillars of the network strategy at the moment are connecting people around the country in local areas. When I did the training programme, it was regional. So all of our Yorkshire networking happened in Sheffield. I was based in a village, in a town called Keighley, west of Bradford, so right out on the Lancashire border. And it would have taken me an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes to travel to Sheffield. And to be honest, there was absolutely no way I was going to do that, particularly when it was cold, dark, I'd been at school all day. So again, that played into this. Whereas this strategy is about having a network within a very sensible 15, 20-minute kind of commute from where you're based. At the moment, there's 35 around the country. You can see them dotted on the map. But I'd really encourage you, as you move forward, to join the most local meetup that you've got. More of these will come through your program. But this is a fantastic way, and Zara, who's on the call, I met Zara through our local meetup in Leeds. It's a great way to meet the Teach First community in your area. This is some samples from last year. And again, what I love about this slide is just the sheer amount of people and the amount of places around the country. Ambassadors who invest in the ambassador community get so much out of it. So that's kind of the words I want to leave and kind of part my session with. The more you invest, the more you get out of it. The more connections you have, the higher well-being you'll have, and the more you'll progress in your career, and the more interesting ideas you'll be able to bring into your classroom, and the more people there'll be to support you on those days that really are challenging. So please reach out, join a meetup, look out for the Teach First networks, and like just the best of luck. Like I can't wait to kind of meet as many of you as possible over the next few years. And I'll pass back to Rob.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that overview, and incredible opportunities there, as you mentioned, to meet up with fellow participants of the Teach First programme and ambassadors as well moving forward. So speaking of ambassadors, I will now introduce our 3 ambassadors that we have with us. I did mention at the start as well that I am also an ambassador, as is Tim. I can't remember if you mentioned that. So actually, technically 5 ambassadors on the screen, but we will focus on these 3 in particular. Before I introduce them, on Teams, you do have a Q&A function. It's very similar to the chat function if you're used to using that. What I'll ask you to do is feel free to start putting your questions into the Q&A now, and we can work our way through them throughout the Q&A panel. If you can't find the Q&A function, which sometimes it doesn't work for some people, which is absolutely fine, feel free to pop it in the chat as well, and I can just flick between the two to make sure we answer as many of those questions as possible. We want you to very much guide the conversation. So if you do have things that you want to hear answers for, please do pop them in and make the most of the opportunity. But without further ado, I'll introduce us very quickly to our 3 ambassadors before I ask them to tell us a bit more about themselves. We've got Clive joining us today, Zara and Steph as well. So 3 fantastic ambassadors who, as I said before, come from different subjects, different cohorts, and have varying experiences like you will when you start the programme as well. What we'll do is we'll start with Zara, if that's all right, to introduce yourself. And when you introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind just telling us your name, obviously, your subject that you taught on the programme and are potentially still teaching, your current role as well, and any networks that you were a part of.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Zara, and I'm part of the 2018 cohort. I trained in English, still teaching English. I've also taught sociology and PE, but English is still my main. I'm trying to remember your list of all your things.
Any networks that you're a part of as well?
So I'm part of the policy network. And yeah, as Tim said, I've also been involved in the local meetups and things like that. But yeah, involved with a policy network.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Steph, would you mind going next for us?
Sorry there. Yeah, I'm Steph. I trained in science. I still teach science. I'm now second in department in my school that I trained in. Part of the 2021 cohort, so fairly fresh out of the Teach First training bubble, although very much part of Teach First still. Networks wise, I run the Hastings local network with the meetups and various other things like Tim has mentioned. So yeah, very much down on the South Coast, running bits and pieces down there for everyone to get involved with.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steph. And last but not least, Clive.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Clive Hill. I'm a science teacher, same as Steph. I trained in 2017, and I'm based up in the East Midlands. I founded one of the first networks that came after the action networks that Teach First was involved in back in 2017. And now currently I've done second in department and stuff, and I'm now on the whole school responsibility for careers.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Clive. Okay, what we're going to do then is going to go into some questions, and I'll position those questions to certain members of the team on the panel, but anyone can also jump in and add their thoughts as well as we go through. At the minute, the first initial question we've had is just about the QR code, which I can see, Tim, you've responded to and said you'll pop into the chat. So please do make the most of that opportunity as well. Whilst we wait for some questions coming through, one that I wanted to sort of reach out to you guys and ask with is around your involvement in networks. And I guess I'm quite keen, you know, Tim spoke a lot there about the positives of the networks and the benefits you get from them. And I'm really keen to just hear from you as individuals what you feel is the sort of main benefit you get from the networks that you've been involved in particular. So I'll let you have a 10-second thinking time while I ad lib, and then if it's okay, I'll start with you, Zara.
Yeah, I think the first thing that springs to mind is the contacts that are formed through the networks. It's great in terms of solidarity and just, you know, you're all going through it, you all go through the similar highs and lows, and the relationship building in that sense. But I think for me, the main thing would be the contacts really that come from that. So linking up with different people, and some people that are out of teaching as well, so they have been, but then they've moved on, and interesting hearing what they're doing in their areas of influence. There was the big summer conference that happened just last summer, and a group of us went down together, and again that then fed on to more kind of contacts and things being made. So I think I personally find it really helpful. Just I think teaching can be so like insular, and you can suddenly get so locked away in your classroom and get very kind of narrow-minded in that sense. It's a great way of just, again, getting that broader picture, linking up with different people, and then using those contacts potentially. So, for example, I want to go into politics, and it's been really helpful kind of hearing different people, different places, hearing like other contact making from that. So yeah, now part of this policy network, so it's led on to that. Yeah, so I think the contacts and the way that it can lead is really helpful.
Thanks, Zara. And Steph, I think you mentioned that you look after the sort of local meetups and things in your area. And I guess sort of moving on, well, adding to that question there around sort of the main benefits of it, I guess what I would ask you is how I'd sort of flip it and maybe say how difficult do you think it might be if you weren't, you know, attending those, and I guess thinking about what benefits does it add in that way?
Yeah. So for me, my Teach First placement was moving away from where I'd lived before. So it was a completely new place, didn't know anybody. And so, yeah, the meetups and connecting with people through Teach First was a great way to meet people and actually get advice on where to live, even that down to areas to avoid, areas that are fine to live. And so, yeah, that was really good. And now running them, being able to support the new people coming in with a similar sort of thing has been really useful. And also, like, training with Teach First is not like any other teacher training. So no one quite knows what you're going through more than the people who have done Teach First or are doing Teach First. So having those people who understand what that training process is just, yeah, was really good for me. And I know has helped a lot of people that I've come across and worked with. So definitely benefits there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steph. I love that. And Clive, anything to add there in terms of sort of main benefits potentially of networks?
Opportunities. Yeah, I think that it's great that, as Sarah said, about meeting up with people and having that shared sort of connection. But for me, it was stuff that happened wider than the network that I was in. I ended up being asked if I wanted to go and speak at conferences. So on the back of that, I ended up going and doing research ed, and on the back of research ed, you then end up being connected to some really influential educators who then open up other opportunities up for you to be able to go and do things as well. So yeah, I'm now in a position where back in 2017, when I can remember sitting in a room with Tom Bennett and watching him talk, because he's a career changer as well. So I was listening to Tom talk, went and introduced myself to him, and he followed me on Twitter. And then it kind of snowballed from there, of where, you know, now I'm having conversations with Tom on a regular basis. And it's just, it's really surreal that if once you put yourself out there and you start saying yes to some of these opportunities, it just supports your career in such a good way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I guess the other flip side of that as well is, as you become more experienced, you're also going to be able to provide those opportunities for other people as well, you know, potentially starting out on the program, which is lovely to think. Fantastic. Thank you for those answers. Now, as part of this sort of Q&A panel, I'm very keen to focus on those first few days and weeks in the classroom, because as we said, you know, everyone here tonight is very excited about starting the program, perhaps slightly nervous, and we're all, you know, we all remember thinking, what is that first day going to be like? What are those first few weeks going to be like? What on earth am I meant to plan, you know, in terms of lessons and things like that? So the first question we've had come in, I think, is a great question. And they've asked, what is one thing you wish you knew on your first day of teaching? And, you know, as ambassadors, we have that fantastic ability of hindsight. But yeah, what is the one thing you wish you knew on your first day of teaching? So I will hand over to, well, unless anyone wants to jump in straight away. It's quite a big question. So I'll hand over to, go on, Clive.
The year 10 girl that was going to be absolute hell for the first 2 years of me teaching was going to then leave me a message. It gave me a card, and inside the card on a results day, excuse the language, it's not that blue. She apologized for being such a bitch. 6 months later, this girl sent me a message on Twitter to say that she was interested in following, maybe looking at a career in teaching. Could I give her a reference for tutoring? She graduates this year, and she's going on to a teacher training program. So that kid that you're thinking she's pushing back on me all the time. Why is she giving me a headache? Yeah, honestly, you'll come to a point where you're going to get such a good win out of that. That yeah, if somebody had told me that challenging kid on my first day was going to be one of those kids that's in touch with me now and is following me into my career path, I wouldn't have believed you.
That's fantastic to hear. And you know what, those sort of stories are, you hear them all the time from teachers, and they're such wonderful stories. I had one the other week from one of our development leads. On her first day, she took that time to talk someone through something in a computing lesson for 10 minutes, and now that person is just graduating, similar story, from a computing degree, because, you know, that one thing just suddenly motivated them and made them realize they can do it. So lots of fantastic stories like that. Steph, over to you. What was one thing you wish you knew on your first day of teaching?
Yeah, so it was kind of said to me after my first day, but building relationship on the first day is far more important than delivering the content. So I think as trainees, we go in and we're like, oh, I need to get this lesson done and the kids need to know this, but actually spending that first hour from a secondary background, just getting to know the kids and setting your expectations is going to be far more worthwhile in the long run than whatever content you were trying to deliver. So yeah, that was said to me after my first day, but I still now, in my first day in September, I don't teach content. I get to know the kids and I build that relationship.
Absolutely, yeah, that is so important. I think it's really hard to, you know, if you're trying to set expectations of behavior and things in your classroom as well, and to not cave and be like, right, we need to move on, but no, like, stand your ground. Make sure, you know, you get those expectations right at the start, and like you say, build those positive relationships as well. And Zara, last but not least, over to you for what is the one thing you wish you knew on your first day?
Yeah, pretty similar to Steph. I really remember sitting in Summer Institute and thinking, sorry, can you hear a baby crying, by the way? Yeah, no, you're all right. Okay, we've got a 3-month-old, so if I need to move, I will. Yeah, I really remember sitting in Summer Institute and just thinking, I really want some wisdom and guidance on behaviour management. It just felt like a whole thing. And I think the thing then that I learned quickly, but yeah, wish I'd known, was just the importance of boundaries, and how actually the naughtiest kids, if anything, they need the boundaries the most. And it's not fair if you keep switching those boundaries and letting people kind of push it a bit, but actually just going in with really high expectations, and really clear boundaries of where your line is. I find that really helpful, but I think the kids find that incredibly helpful, just to know they can't mess with you. It's a kind of a tough love at first, but I think those clear boundaries is really, really helpful.
No, absolutely. That consistency is so key. And I think I found, sort of building on that, when I started the program, one of the teachers I worked with, I found myself wanting to, I said, like, he's a great teacher, I'm going to be like him. But what that meant is my teaching wasn't consistent, because I'd have, elements of his teaching and some of mine, when I actually think, no, just stick with your own style of teaching, and that's going to be consistent, and that's going to therefore, be better in the long run. Speaking of behavior management, we have had a question come in, which was sort of talking about, biggest tips for behavior management. Now, what I'd suggest we answer here is thinking carefully about those first few weeks. So I think we've touched on it already a little bit, because obviously I think your ability to manage behavior will develop massively throughout the year anyway. But what would you recommend in terms of those first few days, weeks in the classroom, as to how best to manage that behavior? And Zara, like I said, I think you've already sort of touched on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the main thing, and I have changed schools since, but this came up in my interview, and what I answered then and answers is the same, is relationships is so important. I think, again, so similar to what Steph said before, but I think it's so much more important to be proactive than reactive when it comes to behavior management. So really trying to build those relationships, get on side with the kids, especially in some of the schools that we go in. They naturally just don't really trust you as a teacher a lot of the time. But I think it's tough at first, investing that time, but finding out those little bits. Like, I taught bottom set year 11 last year. Colourful kids, wonderful, but colourful, shall we say. But I think the thing that really helped getting them on board quickly was just spending time getting to know them. So every time I passed them on a corridor, saying hi, trying to get a conversation going, finding out if what pastimes they like doing. So if they are into football or something, then chatting to them. I don't really know anything about football, but trying to chat to them about that, and just finding that common ground, building those relationships. And then immediately, if something does happen, you've got something to come back to, and you're building that trust, building that relationship. And yeah, I think that's really, really important.
Thanks. Zara, over to you, Clive.
Boundaries is the one thing that I'll say is so critical. As Zara said about getting those good relationships, but I think when I've mentored young teachers that are coming into schools, quite often they fall into a trap of trying to be friends with students, especially sort of like year 11, so year 10s, year 11s. Of where it's, well, actually, if I like get away with this, then they might give me less of a hard time in another area. Kids really, really appreciate boundaries, or they respect boundaries, and I think one of the most important things to remember is it is better to be, when a teacher asks who's your favorite teacher and who is your best teacher, there are two different answers. Your favorite teacher as a kid is the teacher that will let you get away with stuff. Your best teacher is the one that they know is going to be consistent. It doesn't need to be that you're going to be consistently hard on them, as in they're just going to throw in the detentions out left, right, and centre. But if your expectations are what they are, do not budge on them, because what will end up happening is you'll end up chasing your tail from the start of the year all the way through to the end of the year. Whereas if you're firm with it and you're consistent and you're fair, kids will always respect that. And I think when you look at the background and the cohorts of the schools I've taught in, so I've been in I'm in my fourth school. When you look at the cohorts of kids that you've got, quite often they might not have those sort of boundaries at home. And we need to model the behaviors that we expect. So as Zara said, when you walk past the kid in the corridor, morning, smile, and try to get that morning back, because they might not get that at home. So you're always trying to model the best possible version of you that you possibly can be. And it is hard in December when you're up to your eyes and writing your first assignment and you've got marking to do and mocks are coming up. but being able to be that best version of you and modeling that for the kids is absolutely critical, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely, Clive. Thank you. Steph, anything to add there in terms of your top tip?
Yeah, use the knowledge around you. So there'll be teachers who've taught the child that you're struggling with the most in the previous year. Go and ask them what worked for them. It might not work for you, but it gives you options to try. I found that really useful. I had a year 8, they would have been at the time, boy who was just, I could not get to settle and do work. And I went and spoke to his English teacher who he'd had the previous year. And they gave me some tips, and I tried a couple of different ones. And yeah, just use that knowledge around you, because you'll be surprised how they respond to the same thing no matter what lesson they're in. So yeah, just speak to the people that could give you advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, that's something that I think transcends throughout the training program in terms of reach out for that support, and don't feel like you have to ever reinvent the wheel, because you definitely don't. And you know, the skill of a teacher, I think, is always about adapting the resources you have and everything, so make the most of them. Brilliant. Thank you very much for those answers. The next question we've got here is around the Teach First program and how it differs from traditional routes into teaching. So I guess what I would ask you is, what do you think is sort of some of the, maybe one or two of the biggest differences between our route into teaching and those more traditional routes, and I guess potentially why that's a good thing, is how I would look at it. But anyone want to kick us off with that one? Go on, Steph.
Yeah, I think the main one is that you go in on your own, not on your own, that sounds very isolating, but as in the classroom is yours from day one, whereas on some of the other routes you team teach for a lot of the start. So what's really good, and why I really enjoyed the Teach First approach, is that I could have ownership and decide what I wanted from my classroom from day one, and really embed that in my classes, which was great for me. Yeah, I think for me personally, having been watched all the time and having someone else's voice straight away wasn't going to be the right approach. I liked going, okay, this is what I want from my classroom, and being able to actually consistently embed that and then develop it was great, and a really good way of doing it.
Thanks very much, Steph. And Zara or Clive, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think two things similar. How quickly you are in and you're the main teacher. I think in Summer Institute, I think I only observed like 5 lessons, but I was already bored of observing. Maybe that tells you about me. But yeah, so I loved the kind of straight in, you're the teacher. Just, I think you learn by doing with teaching. So you're so quickly just in and doing it and learning. And then the second thing, I think, so my first school was a particularly challenging school. And I think that the support that Teach First gave, there's 3 of us in my, well, 5 of us who were Teach First, 2 year above 3 in my year at the time. And I think that the support that we got was just like second to none. Just like people coming in, even just suggesting what we should be doing. Actually took us out of teaching for a week whilst they worked with the senior leadership of what could be done and things which needed to be better. So I think just you might do a PGCE and then you're done and you're in and you're a teacher and then you're kind of on your own. Whereas with Teach First, it was with those couple of years, you're intensely helped basically and got lots of support and people around and people to call on. And then even after that, then with the network and people around, it still feels like you're part of something bigger and you've still got people to call on. Whereas I think it can be a lot more isolating going into different 3 different paths. So I certainly found that really helpful.
I pretty much echo everything Zara's just said, to be fair. I think that I'm ex-army, and I'll be honest with you, the connections that you get in the military and the connections you get through Teach First, doing the training program with Teach First, because you are both going in both circumstances, going through the same sort of training, you live in the same sort of day-to-day life, you're in the same sort of schools, you've got that shared experience that really does transcend the fact that just that you're a teacher, and the trust that is almost implicit, I find, with reaching out to a Teach First ambassador. So I've got people from like Tim, your 2012 people, Laura McKinney. So I mean, she's one of the first cohorts. I think she's like a 2007. And so you can reach out to them, and you know that they'll be there. They'll give you support. I think the thing that you get most from all of it is the more you put in, the more you'll get back. So if you're that person on the training program that's offering other people support, then people will be more than happy to fire that support back your way. But I think everything that Zara and Steph have just said is absolutely bang on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for those. And I think, when I think about it as well, one thing that stands out to me as one of the biggest differences is when you do Teach First, there will be days where it doesn't quite go according to plan. But what I think is the great thing about our route is you can fix it immediately that afternoon or the next day, because you are the teacher in the classroom and you get that opportunity to do so. Whereas I feel like with other traditional routes into teaching, that perhaps doesn't happen. It might be another week before you get to teach again, or if you're potentially team teaching, you might not even be allowed to fail, in that sense of, they'll step in before it goes sort of wrong. Whereas actually, I think you learn a lot from those lessons that don't go to plan, for those days that don't go to plan, and the next day, like I say, fixing it and making it better. So yeah, huge development and very quick development, I think, in our routes. Brilliant. Thank you for those answers and the question as well. So here's a quick sort of logistical one, if you like. So it might be quite quick to answer. Is it true that teachers must not use real names on social media platforms to prevent pupils from easily finding them? Please give your opinions on this. I think, again, thinking about sort of, starting the program, what would be good here is maybe just giving some advice on how to prepare for becoming a teacher in terms of social media and what to think about, over the next few months as to what you might be adding to social media and things like that. Clive, I see your hand's gone straight up, potentially to answer this question, so over to you.
Purge. Go onto your social. You can have your name on social media. The kids at school have Googled me. They found everything about me on social media. They've been able to. My name on Facebook is Clive JH, just purely because I couldn't be bothered with kids trying to find me. But they'll still find you. As soon as you add one colleague, then they'll find a way of getting hold of you. It's not too difficult. Just make sure, and this is advice I'd give to anybody coming into any business, let alone teaching, lock your account down the best you possibly can. Don't share anything on social media that you would not want the kids to be able to see or the parents to be able to see. Twitter, you can go on there as I'm on there as my real name. Everything I post on there, I know is going to come under scrutiny from anybody that's looking, that's either in my school. My head teacher followed me, which is how I ended up getting my job anyway. So I saw the job, it was advertised. So it's got massive benefits, but just be very aware that what you post can be seen publicly on something like Twitter. Instagram, lock it down, because you're going to be sharing holiday photos on there. Kids are going to get hold of those. Facebook, check to make sure what you observe, anything you follow on there is viewable. So make sure that you've checked those. So just between now and Summer Institute, start going through your socials and making sure that you're tweaking things, deleting stuff that you don't need, and restrict access to stuff. Thanks, Clive, for those tips and words of wisdom. Zara or Steph, anything to add, or are you similar impressions? Steph shaking her head, yeah, very similar. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the best thing to do is the key thing Clive said there, I think, is don't add anything you wouldn't want them to see, because at the end of the day, if they do get hold of it, then it's just going to be frustrating, potentially embarrassing for you as well. So yeah, for a positive side of things as well, whenever I was teaching, as far as I know, no one ever found my social media and things like that. So I obviously locked it down quite well. If you aren't sure how to lock it down, do have a look on Google and search how to lock down accounts, and reach out to those social media platforms to find out how best to lock down your account properly and securely as well. I'm sure there are people out there that can help you do that. So next question.
Here's my terrible pronunciation of a local English town, so apologies in advance. I think Tim mentioned training in Keighley. I'm from Keighley and hoping to train there. Any suggestions or advice about teaching in your local area or networking within a smaller town would be much appreciated. So potentially I might move to you, Steph, there, because I know obviously you sort of talk about networking in your local area. Do you want to kick us off there? So any suggestions or advice about teaching in your local area or networking within a small town?
Yeah, so I'm based in Hastings, which is a very isolated seaside town. So although not landlocked, is isolating, and it's one road out, one road in kind of town. And what it has its positives and negatives. So yes, okay, it's a small place, but using the networks and reaching out to teachers, teach firsters, you tend to find that you get year-on-year trainees. So there is, even if there's not 5 years previous ambassadors like we've got in Hastings, I think we only go for maybe 5 years back. There are people there, or at least there's people a year ahead of you at this point. And but what is really nice is there's such a community atmosphere to it. So in Hastings, everybody knows everyone. Like the parents will say hello, but you very much get welcomed in, but you become part of that community because it's small and everyone is there for each other and wants to do it. So although it might feel isolating initially, actually you'll find very quickly you become part of their world, and get supported by the parents just as much as you support their child. So yeah, it's a really nice environment to be in.
Love that. Thanks, Steph. Clive?
So my wife's a midwife in the local area. We live in the local area. I get seen in the supermarkets. We used to live in catchment, so I'd be seen down the pub. I know several of the parents outside of work as well because of connections with my wife, and it really helps, certainly in my role as the careers lead. The amount of parental engagement that I get to do by being able to break down those barriers and have conversations with people on a really honest level is so helpful. One of the things I do make sure that I do is I don't refer to myself as Mr. Hill when I'm speaking to a parent. I'm Clive, because I'm on the same level as them, and I'm trying to break down those barriers. Because if you're in a small community, I know people that teach in Hastings. If you're in a small community, then you'll probably find that the parents went to that school, and that they can quite often come with baggage for their experience at school. So if they had a negative experience, they are probably going to be coming into school carrying that baggage. And just by you breaking down that barrier, as a male teacher, I don't wear a blazer when I meet a parent. I don't wear my jacket. I quite often have my sleeves rolled up, and I'm on first name terms. And I think that makes a big difference. So sort of, from networking with the locals, I think that's a big part of it. I've had one issue with a parent that posted something on social media which one of the kids told us she needed to take down wasn't fair. And I saw that parent on a careers evening that I put, and I spoke to her about it. I mean, I didn't see the post, but I spoke to her about it in a quite a jokey way, because she was completely on board with what I was doing to help her daughter. So I wouldn't be worried about living in the local area, because most of the time people will know, as long as you're honest with them, that you want the best for the kids. Parents are never going to be battling against you, because they want the best for their kids as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Clive. Yeah, I love that idea of going on the same level. Thinking back to the parents I worked with, definitely would have helped with a few of them, for sure. Tim, I did see your hand go up, but it's gone back down again. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think in terms of local area, I think it's very easy to I think Clive mentioned baggage and coming from a place of deficit, but actually I'd really encourage I think something that I didn't recognize until actually becoming a dad is how much trust parents are putting in you to look after the most precious thing in the world. Until I watched my daughter wander through those doors during the first lockdown and felt that wrench, and then recognized my daughter would come home from school and talk about her teachers all of the time. And I never really clicked that these wonderful humans are going to go home and actually talk about you outside of school as well. So I think it's don't come from a place of deficit, like come from a place of like asset building. Like in every community, no matter how tough, like there's assets, whether that be people, whether that be organizations, opportunities. So I think if you're from an area and you're teaching in that area, then more than anybody, you'll know the assets. So I'd say like double down and like bring those into school and like use that knowledge. And don't shy away, like be proud of the fact that you're teaching in the community that you grew up in. And like, that's actually an amazing thing, because a lot of the time people talk about a brain drain and taking professionals away from areas and putting them in other areas. Whereas our whole point is working in those communities and keeping brilliant people in those communities. So it's amazing if you are in Keighley. Yeah, lots of assets around.
Absolutely, and you know, one of my, I think my proudest moments working for Teach First, you know, in the role I do, where we sort of encourage people to apply for the program, is having people come through who are saying things like, "I was taught by a Teach First teacher." You know, now we're 20 years old. They were taught by people, and they want to have that difference as well in their local community, and it really is fantastic to see. You know, incredible work. Is that you, Tim?
Yeah, on that no, I wasn't, sadly.
Oh.
I guess two stories. I'm in the storytelling mode now. But at one of the first Leeds meetups, we were having some pizza at Pizza Express on the edge of Leeds. And I noticed that two people at the table kept giving each other really weird looks, like, you know, when you kind of think you recognise someone, but you're not sure. And like, as they were sharing a margarita, they realised that actually one of them had been taught by the other one. And they had that click moment of, oh my God, like you're Miss So-and-so. And that was amazing. And then the second one was just like the years later, where people do find you on Facebook and like drop a message to say, yep, I'm doing this now. And like, that's just one of the most rewarding things ever as a teacher. And as a primary teacher, you don't really get that. So like my proudest moment, I think, was 10 years after teaching a class, a parent looked me up on Facebook and said, oh, don't know if you remember this child, but I just wanted to let you know she started university this year, first in the family ever to go. She's doing X, Y, and Z, and it was just the most life-affirming moment ever.
Oh, absolutely, and like you say, yeah, primary takes a bit longer to get there for sure. But secondary, you do hear people getting in touch and saying about the great things they're doing, or bumping into them in town and seeing what they're doing and things like that. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on then, in the interest of time, to another question. I think this is a really good question here. And again, I think important to focus on those first few days, weeks in the classroom, because obviously you're going to have a lot on your mind. So this question here is around how you adapt your teaching approach towards students who might need extra help and support without isolating them in the classroom and perhaps setting them apart and to feel potentially slightly different. So I guess that question is, how do you strike that delicate balance without potentially embarrassing them? And as I said, obviously, when you first step into the classroom, you've got a lot to think about. So any sort of tips on how to potentially approach that? So that you can strike that good balance. It's quite a big question though. Go on, Clive.
You get taught a thing called scaffolding, and I think that's where I'd go straight away. Back when I was training, people were still talking about differentiation in lessons, and I needed to produce 3 different lots of resources. And basically, I'd turn around and go, "Oh, you're all bright and gifted. Here's the gold, and you guys are all." I'm going to be honest. This is how it comes across: is you're all a little bit thick. Here's the bronze, because you're never going to do any better. And I'm really glad to say that school completely changed the way that it was doing things over the 5 years I was involved with it. So the scaffolding is where you'll set them the same task, but you might go along and you go and sit, just while you're doing your walk around the classroom, just put a little bit of extra help on their sheet. I use a purple pen, so nobody uses purple inside the classroom. I'll put a little bit of extra support down for them, or I might talk them through the next couple of steps and do it with them, get them to use a whiteboard. And if you get quite a few that are anxious about getting stuff wrong, especially, I'm going to blame primary teachers on this one, of where they'll have rough books and then they put their perfect work in their perfect book. And so you do have some kids that will come through, mostly the girls, if I'm honest, that want their books to be perfect. So get them to make mistakes on, if they're a bit anxious, get them to make mistakes on whiteboards, like the little mini whiteboards. And I think that really helps. But just by giving them that extra bit of support, that some of them might need it breaking down a little bit more than you already have, because you get taught about a thing called chunking. So you might break it down and go, well, what I want you to do is I just want you to write 3 lines on this and then move on. It's just about those that you'll get taught all the specifics, but just giving out a little bit of extra time you're not giving the other students is often enough to be able to support them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Clive. Great tip there. Steph or Zara, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to go off where what Clive was saying about the whiteboards. I teach mixed ability in my school, so we don't have sets. So in my year 10 class, for example, I could have students who are aiming for 1s and students that are aiming for 9s. So you quite often find that you need some that need more support than others, but it's not setting those different tasks. It's going, right, you're all going to get to this point at the end, but having the different techniques of how they get there, the pathway to get to the final point. Because actually, from what my experience is, those students really appreciate the fact that they've ended up in the same place, even if it has taken them a little bit longer, and that embarrassment's been taken away because they have still achieved the same outcome. So you almost, by giving them all the same task and helping them, take away that embarrassment straight away, even if there is just one of them that needs that extra support. So
absolutely. Thank you, Steph, for adding that. And Zara, anything to add?
Not really. I think it's all been said. I think, yeah, scaffolding, you'll learn all about it, and it's the key.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Summer Institute does a fantastic job of preparing you for these types of situations and scenarios. So yeah, do not worry at all. You'll get lots of tips and tricks on how to approach it, and you'll love the opportunity to help those students get to where they need to get to. A quick question here, probably I'm just going to direct this one straight to you, Tim, actually. Is there the opportunity to network on specific topics? For example, this trainee is really interested in discussing ethics, especially with respect to different beliefs.
Yeah, so I think, yes, there is. The way we're moving, though, is specifically looking at professional development in the networks that Teach First will deliver. However, there is a Facebook group for multi-faith, so if there's interest there, there is a group with people in. It's not amazingly active, which is one of the reasons we're moving away, similar to a group for parents. I can share the links in the side to those groups, really happy to do that. But also the reason we're making that move is there's so many networks out there already that a lot of the time we actually found we were trying to recreate spaces that already exist. So I'd really suggest having a look online, particularly around issues such as those, to find groups. There's groups like Diverse Ed, people like that who are doing amazing work in this space, bringing teachers together around issues. Parents, if you are interested in that specifically, really ironically, I've just seen the CEO of a group called MTPT have emailed me. That's an ambassador called Emma Shepherd, who started a charity about the motherhood penalty and really looking at how that affects kind of progression in education. Again, I'll share a link in a second. But yeah, there's loads of amazing stuff out there, and I'd encourage people to reach out and look around. And as I think of more over the next few minutes, I'll post any links in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you, Tim. And I think as well, one just popped into the chat about a specific group. I think you answered or covered it actually, so we'll leave that one in there. Okay, question here then around sort of support. I'm aware of time, by the way, so we'll try and get through these last two that have come in, and then we might have to wrap up. But someone here is currently working as a science technician, so as a member of the sports team, and she feels as though kids don't necessarily listen or obey you as support staff. So the question there is around, she's going to be stepping into this school and they know her already in this sense. So any tips there on how to sort of get those kids to see her as now the teacher in the classroom from day one? Steph?
Yeah, we had one of our science technicians did exactly the same move this year. So they're in their training year about to finish. And they didn't do Teach First, but still come from that technician into teaching. And the big bit of advice we gave them, and it worked quite well, is you've just got to go in with your following the school policy from day one. And if they're going to disrespect you, you follow those behaviour policies and just show them that, okay, you might think like this, but I am your teacher now, and you are going to meet my expectations. And it might be a little bit of a battle for the first couple of lessons, but you just got to stick with it. Like if you back down, they're just going to bite on that. So just sticking with it And yeah, it took 2 lessons and they very much quickly were like, okay, it's not a technician, they are my teacher and they are going to discipline for my lack of respect. So yeah, just stick to it.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, great advice there. And I think as well, what's nice is, you coming into this role from that position of being a support staff, you can hopefully help students to respect those staff perhaps a bit more, and you know what it was like. So hopefully you can encourage that as the teacher in the classroom as well. But yeah, definitely, and we've mentioned it a few times throughout the talk today, but consistency is absolutely key there. Just going to move on to this last question that's come through, and this is about sort of students' names. And when you first start in that classroom, there's quite a lot of students to remember. And how do you go about addressing students until you get those names memorized? So they've particularly sort of said, can you say things like "hello, dear" and things like that? And what do you call pupils during the course of teaching? Can you collectively group them as "hello, guys" and things like that? So go on, Zara, over to you.
I am notoriously awful at remembering names, which is not a good trait as being a teacher. It's been a real challenge. So what I did, and I definitely did it the first few years of teaching, and then you can generally get to know the kids. But one thing I did, which I found really helpful, was I gave them all a small piece of paper and got them all to fold it in half, and then they wrote their name at the front. So they all had basically like a kind of name tag. So for the first few lessons, they all had that, and then they put it on a desk each lesson. So I could just see and start to associate their names with their faces. And then the other thing I got them to do was write inside just like one sentence, something they wanted me to know about them. Only I was going to read it, and like I said before, it was just a good way of
Might have lost Zara there, or is that just for me?
I've not got her either.
Okay. I think what she was saying there at the end is with that sort of name on your table with a sentence on the inside of an interesting fact or something the student wants the teacher to know about them, which is a lovely idea, for sure. And if Zara returns, I'll let her finish. But while we wait, she's potentially back now. Are you back, Zara?
Yes. Hi.
Sorry.
When did that go off?
No, you got to talking about sort of having something interesting written on the inside of the name label, and we got to there.
Great. Yeah, and so I was just going to read it, and then, like I said before about relationship building, it helped with that.
Absolutely. No, you're still there. You've finished. So thank you, thank you for that. It's much appreciated. Go on, Clive. Over to you, and then we'll think about wrapping up.
I mean, I'm absolutely shocking at remembering names now, and the way that I deal with it is to start off with is I'll point with the whole hand, so to gesture to a kid that I want to speak to them, and I ask them to tell me their name before they give me an answer, because it's the only way that I'm going to remember it. And the one thing that I would say is really, really important is make sure you learn how to say the kid's name. Don't accept them to give you a nickname. It's all right, I don't know, so you get a name and they'll say, it's all right, you'll never be able to say it, just call me this. Learn how to say the name, because it's really, really, important. It's part of their identity. It's part of their culture. And just to put it into context, I'm gonna hit return, and you'll see these are the 3 names of my kids. I've got a Neve, I've got an Usheen, and I've got a Saoirse. Teachers are going to hate me, but Usheen's at my school. He's in year 9 at the school that I teach in. And staff have been really good, and the kids have been amazing at making sure that staff say his name properly. So just make sure that if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. You apologise. You try to say it again, and you move on. But the best way that I found it for learning them is you've got, as Zara said, the little fold of cards. But even about I'll be honest with you, I'm coming towards the end of year 7. There's some year 7s that I still can't remember the names of for the life of me, because they're the really quiet ones that have got quite poor attendance. So I'll try to make sure that it's like, who's that in the seating plan? Keep your seating plan there if you need to, but give me a name until they know that you can ask for them by name. And I found that really helped.
Absolutely, yeah. And to be fair, seating plans are very, very useful. One thing I found as well in all the schools I was in, on the system, like the register system and things like that, it normally had a picture to go with the name. So if you're ever trying to remind yourself, like, oh, who is that again? You've got a rough idea. The picture should hopefully help. The only downside of that is if you're in secondary and they're pictures from year 7 and then now year 10, kids change a lot in terms of appearance. But yeah, and the other thing I'd say as well is they don't expect you to remember all their names from day one. You know, they know you're teaching lots of different children, so they won't be overly offended if you forget and have to ask them to repeat it. It's absolutely fine. Brilliant. Okay, well, due to time, I'm going to have to bring us to a close there. So thank you ever so much, everyone that's come along to watch, for asking some fantastic questions, and a huge thank you to our panel as well for some excellent answers there and sharing your insights. What I'll do is I'll just say it to everyone, good luck on the program. We have got those other sessions coming up as well, so please do come along to those and find out more about things like behaviour management, managing your workload, and what to expect from Summer Institute and things like that as well. But for now, enjoy the rest of your evenings. A huge thank you to Zara, Clive, Steph and Tim, and we wish you all the best. Thanks everyone.